Here is honesty in self-assessment. Notice some of these other verses in this section. In verse 21, what Paul says about himself. And remember, he's writing in the present. What does he say? I find then the principle that evil is what? Present in me, the one who wants to do good. The evil is present in me. Right now, he says. You see, folks, Paul was not just having a bad day when he wrote Romans 7. He was not merely suffering from a sense of inadequacy and low self-esteem. Paul's realistic appraisal of his spiritual life came from measuring himself against the high and holy expectations that God has for all of us. And the more Paul became aware of what God wanted, the more aware he became of his inability in his own strength to live as God wanted him to live. And he admits it. And I suggest to you, until every Christian comes to that point and admits it, there is no possibility for growth, spiritual growth in the Lord, until we come to this point. Well, Pastor, I've been in the church 40 years. Why would I have to say anything like that? Pastor, I'm a seventh-generation Adventist. I'm a third-generation Adventist. Why would I have to admit to anything like that? You know what you've just fallen into with that argument? The very argument Paul deals with in the verses we've said before about the chosen and their attitude. No, we need to understand. And so Paul, I suggest to you, he was still under construction when he writes this letter to the Romans. Still under construction. You see, folks, sanctification is the process of coming increasingly to see how sinful we are so that we will depend constantly on Jesus Christ. Sometimes in the past, the idea of sanctification has been preached in such a way to say, wow, we've really arrived now. I suggest to you that the closer you get to Jesus, the more undeserving you see of yourself. And Paul is writing here as a mature Christian, not a young Christian. Because his maturity came in that realization that the closer you get to Jesus, the less you see of yourself. That is maturity in Christian growth. And my, have we got that wrong sometimes? That's maturity. Most of us will never see this without going through a civil war within, like Paul was experiencing. That's what he's talking about here in these verses. This is a civil war within him that he's experiencing. What made the Civil War such a terrible war? At the Battle of Sessionville, June 1862, two brothers, Alexander and James Campbell, were on opposite sides. And after that battle, Alexander wrote his brother, and he said, I hope you and I will never again meet face to face bitter enemies on the battlefield. But if such should be the case, you have but to discharge your duty for your cause, for I can assure you I will strive to discharge my duty to my country and my cause. What's the worst thing about the Civil War? Fighting your own. And in this case, and it happened several times, documented through the Civil Wars, brother would be fighting against brother, father would be fighting against son. And can you imagine what the mother was thinking about her two boys that were fighting against each other? Whose side would she be on? You see, it's a terrible thing to go through civil war. And Paul's civil war is explained very well in verse 23. Because he says, "But I see a different law in the members of my body, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin which is in my members." It's a war. It really is a war. And this is what Paul is saying. He's using these very words. It's a war. Do you know that Vietnam was never proclaimed a war? Never. Those of you, and we who went through it, lost some of our relatives, and I lost one of my best friends in the academy in that Vietnam War. But that war was called a protracted military conflict. Congress never enacted a resolution to say we were at war. You know how many lives were lost in that protracted military conflict? 63,000 American lives. It was never declared a war. Folks, it's a war. And this is what Paul is saying. It is a war. We are in a spiritual war. And you say, oh yes, I know there's external forces out there. You know, there's things we got to fight all the time. External forces bearing down on us, coming down on us. This is not what Paul's talking about here. You know what the war he's talking about here? The war within. We can get so excited that we're going to fight all those external things that are coming down to destroy our faith, when the very thing that could be destroying our faith is a war that's going on inside of us. We can point to all the dangers. Wow, watch out for that, watch out for that. What did Luther say? What was the biggest danger in his walk of faith? Himself. And until we recognize that, and do not have denial, until we recognize that, the Lord really cannot